Hi everyone and welcome to the Design VC, the show where design meets business and creativity meets capital. And I'm your host Andy Budd. Each week I talk to founders, investors and designers about their role and the role of design in startups. Today I'm joined by Traynor, co-founder of Intercom, one of the most influential SaaS companies in the past decade. Des has helped redefine how startups think about both customer communication and design and is one of the sharpest product thinkers around. So Des, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to chat.
Really, really nice to see you. For the audience, me and Des kind of go way back to before the Intercom days. I've always really loved your sharp takes on kind of design and technology in the startup world. So I'm really excited to speak to you today.
And likewise, I would just say, genuinely, UX London all the way back with Clear Left. I mean, I've been following you and your career, I guess, for the entirety of my career.
Amazing. Well, I'm glad we get a little bit of time to kind of delve into some stuff we probably haven't spoken about for a while. So I kind of wanted to take you all the way back to kind of the early days of Intercom. I know it's probably a dim and distant memory now, but can you remember what the spark was to start Intercom and what the kind of original core problem was you were looking to solve?
It's kind of, it's a bit fuzzy, but we actually had a different product and we were trying to basically talk to the customers of a different product. So to set the scene a little bit, 2009, 10, 11, the coolest thing you could possibly be was a design consultancy that had a web app that was making money on the side. You guys had that with Silverback. We looked up to Basecamp a lot as well. And it was basically the thing to do. And like there was all sorts of success stories like MailChimp and all that had come out of that. So that's what we were doing. We had a design consultancy called Contrast, and we had a side product called Exceptional, which was it was a Ruby on Rails error tracking tool. But what's probably more important about it was neither Owen, who's our CEO, nor I really lived or breathed like exception tracking, if you know what I mean. Like it wasn't actually our core passion, and that actually led to this idea of like we should probably talk to our users a bit. And separately, we used to have to send messages out about, hey, product was down or there was an outage or whatever. So one day we had this little message that appeared inside the product to give some news. Because historically, if you remember, like in 2010, the way in which you communicated to your users was you'd get an SQL dump from your CTO and you'd sync that against your PayPal dashboard because Stripe didn't exist. And you look for the people who are paying for and using the product and perhaps who are active during the issue you're talking about. And then you'd load all that into like a campaign monitor or a MailChimp or something like that. I'm really going blast from the past here. And you'd send all that out and then the replies would arrive in your Gmail. And basically no one read these things and no one replied to them. And so one day it was like, well, let's push a message inside the product. There's a really interesting bit of history here. The logo for Exceptional was a little star and it was down in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. And one day a little speech bubble popped out of it. And that's kind of the origin of the Intercom in-app messenger that is now prevalent across the entire internet. And I think it was like Owen said to Kieran, who was our CTO, wouldn't it be funny if this little like bag of JavaScript that basically produces a pop-up becomes bigger than this whole exceptional thing we've been building. And literally, I think 2 years later, that was totally the case. And then obviously these days, it's a much bigger thing again.
I mean, that's amazing. I kind of knew that there was a previous product, but I didn't realize quite how closely coupled it was and one emerged from the other. I mean, I love the stories, the classic story of Slack kind of coming out of glitch. And so it's great that you're one of those stories that kind of, found a small kind of feature and then turned that into the core product. I'm curious, so what did those first few months look like? So you decided to move away from the original idea, you're prototyping, like how did you get your first customers? How did you get the product in people's hands? And how did you know that this was going to be the thing that worked?
A few different pieces to that. So I think we already had a network of like people who were building web products because they were using our other product. So that was the fertile ground to start in. On top of that, I was just out there emailing people. So I still do this today for Finn, for what it's worth, but like just emailing people and saying, hey, here's the thing we can do. And like making sure it's an actual heartfelt, real email and not an automated thing still, I believe, works. And so like we were mailing people and we were getting more bites than average. And I think that's true when you're not selling a rip and replace, but you're actually selling a new thing that people didn't already have one of. Because it was very compelling at the time in 2011 to say, don't you wish you could talk to your customers directly inside your product? And everyone, pretty much everyone would say, yeah. And they would say, look at this thing. And they'd be like, gimme. you know. So it was very like easy. And I remember one call that really stood out in my mind when I was like, my confidence. I'm naturally a little bit pessimistic, but my confidence really grew was if you remember Garrett Demon from Sifter. So Garrett had like an issue tracking thing called Sifter, and he installed Intercom, and we jumped on a Skype call. Me and Owen jumped on a Skype call with him, and he just exploded onto the call. He's just like, "Oh my god, this is the most amazing thing ever! I've just spent all day talking to customers. I asked them what should I build. I've got like pages and pages of ideas for new features. I've got bug reports. I've got everything. He's like, I'm drowning in customer feedback. I've never actually felt connected to my customers before like this." And we were like, yeah, that was our experience too. But like, it was so refreshing to hear one of the like big dogs of the running a design consultancy while having a product on the side space really acknowledge that. And from then onwards, it just became a thing that, like, Intercom, like people use it as a verb. Or Intercom, my customers to say this, or I posted via Intercom, whatever. And then it's just kind of like the next few years, it's a bit of a blur. Like we went from like no revenue to 1 million to 50 million in the space of 3 years. And like back, as I often joke, back then that was fast. These days it's not fast, but like certainly back then it was breakout stuff.
I mean, it's still fast for a lot of companies. Obviously, I work in the kind of like the early stage startup kind of space now, and actually, yeah, it takes people 2 or 3 times longer than they think they're going to take to get to their first million than their first kind of 2 or 5 million. And so I think even now, like obviously, if you keep the lovables aside, that still seems like it's pretty good traction, pretty good progress. I love the story about the kind of the emailing people. I mean, as you know, it's something I actually kind of stole and put in my book, because I still think there's something brilliant around sending 100 emails to 100 different customers, and really, really quickly you get to get feedback, you get to understand what works, you get sort of to figure out the right tone of voice. I meet so many people that are so quick to jump into the automated kind of response, and like even with AI, you can tell, you can sniff these things out.
It's still garbage. Yeah. But there's also like, what are you trying to do? Like, as in, like, we're literally like, the thing I would implore any young founder to think about, or any founder of any age, but especially young if they're at the early stage of their career, is like, you're not just doing sales. You're actually trying to learn the problem domain that you work in. And that does actually mean talking to people one by one. And when we said, and because like you're learning like a combination of sales, marketing, and product all at the same time, because sometimes people don't open the email, and that means the subject line wasn't very interesting. And sometimes people open it, but they reply, "No, thanks." And you say, "Why?" And they say, "Oh, we already have one." And I say, "Do you?" And they say, "Yeah, we've got MailChimp." And you're like, "Oh, I shouldn't have led with the email example. I should have led with the in-app example. That's more differentiated." And sometimes they get caught on how hard the install is, and we should have been clearer about that being very easy or whatever. But the whole time you're like honing and refining the messaging and also the expected feature set. And like, that's too important to automate. It's the same as like when people talk about growth hacking, and I'm like, growth's important, don't hack it. I would say the same about this. It's not like you're not just trying to get customers. You're trying to work out if the bet that you make with the best probably 5 years of your career in terms of energy and time free and all that, you're trying to evaluate that bet as quickly as you can. So don't outsource that to an LLM or to an agency for that matter. Like, live, drink, eat, and breathe it, because you're about to make a massive, massive investment of your career. You bet you should definitely do your homework.
Yep. I mean, this is the thing I find fascinating about this is like what you're saying now is kind of almost kind of startup sort of advice 101. And yet still like 15, 20 years on, people are not really sort of listening. When people hear about talking to their customers, often I meet a lot of founders that are talking to their customers, not looking to find problems, but looking for validation. And every bit of information that tells them they're on the right path, they kind of focus in on. And anything that gives them a counter example, they ignore, they dismiss, they say, well, these users are stupid or they're not in our market or whatever. And actually really listening to the stuff that makes you feel uncomfortable is much more valuable than just the pats on the back you get. So I think that's something that's really important. I think the other thing you talked about is I think that kind of positioning is massively important. People talk about product market fit. And most of the people I know who are builders, they focus on the product side of things. They focus on how the things work.
Yeah.
But knowing how to actually explain that to customers. And you can do that through kind of like, smart positioning documents or through your website. But I actually think like sending 100 emails, having 100 phone conversations and figuring out the exact combination of words or framing and really listening to the words that you're prospective customers use. And I think that's one of the skills that you did really well, is you really, really quickly lent into that customer discovery and framed the problem and the product in a way that just really immediately resonated, rather than having to run around for months and months, if not years, trying to get the positioning right.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, like it's not like it's not just a startup muscle, in my opinion. Like, as in, I'm doing that work, and so is Owen and a few of us now for Finn. For Finn, both the AI agent for support, but then we're also, most recently, we decided to make it a broader customer facing agent, so it can do sales and marketing too, for example. And it's the same plan. It's like you have to talk to people, work out what they do want, what they don't want. Are you replacing a tool? If not, why not? If you are, what was the thing they liked about that? It's jobs to be done. It's four forces. It's all that sort of stuff that you know is essential. But I think there's a danger. One of the reasons I think a lot of companies' second acts or second products tend to be tend to miss the mark or whatever, is that they kind of get a little bit too much, if you like, belief in their own ideas, and they actually aren't willing to do the humble act of, like we often say in Intercom, shipping is an act of humility and confidence. And it sounds like a juxtaposition, but what we mean is you have to be confident enough to put it live and say, try this thing out. But you also have to be humble enough to know that you're probably wrong. And you're going to get a lot of feedback, a lot of slaps in the face. And you're going to take all that back to the workshop, and you're going to say, right, turns out people like this, they don't like that. They thought this would work that way and it didn't. Okay, let's iterate, let's go again. And like, that's ultimately the thing. Like, and it's, you know, it's not that dissimilar a muscle to like what you and I would have done back in the day with user testing, where you don't go to 100 users, you go to 7, and 7 usually tells you all you need to know, and then you see you fix all your shit, and then you go to the next 7. And I just think that sort of flow is like exhausting and tiring, and it's hard work, but it's also the reason why tech pays off disproportionately well, because like when you get it right, you get it really, really right. So it's worth doing the sort of the early work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of particularly sort of technical builders, they can think of nothing more awkward than kind of talking to customers, and so they kind of lean into the product. I often think design founders or founding designers or founding product people can be really good because they've been brought up on the idea of customer discovery. And actually, weirdly, I think sales is one step beyond customer discovery, because in a really good sales call, you're listening to your customers, you're trying to understand what their pain points are, and then effectively you're showing them how your product kind of solves that problem. So it's only one step forward. I think a lot of founders really feel shy around sales because I think it's some kind of convincing people to buy something they don't need, whereas actually I think it's an act of service. And so I think you've done a really good job. I think the other thing that was really impressive with the early days is you heavily lent into kind of content marketing. Again, I think there's a real trend for the founder to write the first 5 or 6 blog posts and then maybe post once a month because they're busy doing all the other important product building stuff, and then hire a marketing person to come and kind of like basically do everything for them. And I think that the founders at Intercom, I think you like wrote the first like maybe 98 of the first 100 posts or more. And even to this day, you're very active.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of my job. Like, it wasn't like some altruistic thing. You know, it's funny the way people talk about content marketing even now. There's this sense of, again, like, how can I outsource it? How can I automate it? But the question I used to get all the damn time from like real credible companies too was like, where do you find the time? And I'm like, well, where do you find the time to write code? Where do you find the time to do design work? Where do you find the time to sell your product? It's something somebody has to do. Mm-hmm. And if you think about what content marketing is, if you take it at its truest form and forget about the spammy kind of nonsense version of content marketing, but think about what you're actually trying to do. What you're actually trying to do is put out ideas into the landscape that will serve to attract the type of people who will be good customers for your products. And as such, the ideas that you put out tend to be often just a different way of rendering a kind of core concept. So I used to say internally a lot like, hey, there's this idea we used to talk about, which is like send the right message to the right user at the right time. Now, I had a conference talk where I could talk about that, and there's a blog post titled that on our blog. There's also like Ruby code that actually executes that, and they're all, to my mind, they're all the same thing. And what my job is to like produce one version of that idea which attracts people who need it. And what Kieran and Owen and other people's job is to produce a programmatic version of that does it. So I'm saying, here's the thing you should do. And they're saying, here's the thing that does it. And I think that's so like when you realize all that and you talk about what true thought leadership or content marketing is, you're throwing out ideas that if people believe in, they will logically be a good customer of your product. And then you say, right, and now your plan is to hire 3 17-year-olds to bash out blog posts all day. You're like, huh, that doesn't seem consistent with what we just said we were trying to do, which to my mind nets out as it's possible that the best people to do the thought leadership for a company are actually the people who are driving the actual strategy of the company, which often looks like founders or C-level people. So in Intercom, it's often me or it's Paul or it's Emmett or whatever. But like, we're not licking these ideas off a stone, to use an Irish phrase. But like, we're not just making shit up in a room to sort of have something provocative to say. What we're actually doing is saying, what are the key ideas that sit underneath Finn? Well, one of them is the idea that actually AI outperforms human, and we shouldn't compare AI with the perfect human. We should compare it with the average. Okay, cool. And how do we do that? Well, we in the product we have this report screen where we show you Finn's performance relative to your humans. And in the blog post, we should make this point about how actually self-driving cars, while they're never going to win the F1, they're actually safer on average. And like, to me, like, that's the same thing. It's just two different renderings of the same idea in different ways. And I just think like, I almost kind of recoil when people say, "Oh, Des, for some reason you have this weird kink for product, for content marketing or thought leadership." I'm like, it's not that. It's just, if you actually want to go to market that way, that is how you do it. There are other ways to go to market, right? There genuinely are. Stripe went kind of developer first. Linear went, if you like, I would say like almost design first, product purist first, but also method first or whatever. Like, they had a very like clear belief in how projects should be ran, and they encodified that and in a certain way. And they actually did do some really dope content marketing along the way too. But like, people have different ways of doing it. And HubSpot did it really well with inbound or whatever. But like, most of the great SaaS companies that we know of and look up to, they their founders weren't that far away. Like, Dharmesh at HubSpot is still quite active. HubSpot's, I don't know, like, what is it? I'm going to guess now because this will be out of date anyway. But let's say it's a $40 billion company. The CTO is still out there writing and talking all the damn time. And it's not a coincidence, and it's not some weird like trait of me. It's just, it's a job that needs doing, and I do it because I guess maybe I'm deemed to be good at it or afraid of it, or maybe I'm good at nothing else. But like, I just think if you're a founder trying to copy that, take it seriously. Like, don't think you should hire somebody who's ex Intercom and have them run the whole thing. They'll probably do a good job, but ultimately your ideas have to come from you.
I mean, this is it. I see a lot of people hiring marketers who are very good, but they kind of produce this sort of like low quality background radiation. They've been tasked with producing a certain amount of posts a week, of growing their following by a certain amount, and they're very good at hitting those targets. But they would jump to another company in a month or a year's time or whatever and be talking about some other sector. Whereas with you, you have that real passion. And I think that comes through. I think that authenticity, particularly in a new sector, like, people read your stuff, it really chimes with them. They think these people really care. And probably, where I'm, using the tool at the moment, they don't care. They don't care about me. They don't care about this sort of sector. And so that passion really comes through. And I think, a lot of people have tried to copy what you've done, and a lot of them have done it really poorly because it doesn't come from the heart, which I think you've always done. One thing I was curious around, we'll move on to a little bit more of the kind of the mid portion of Intercom in a second, but like, obviously you mentioned that you worked at Contrast, this agency. I'm just wondering if there's anything that you took from that company that helped shape the DNA, maybe the product, maybe the culture, maybe the team. What did you bring from Contrast to Intercom?
Like, running a consultancy puts a lot of discipline on you in terms of how you spend your time, because like, as a consultancy, you're typically charging for it in some way, shape, or form. I know everyone tries to avoid it, but actually we found it was probably the most profitable way to run a business was actually just to sell time. But I to give you an example of how that translated, like, in the consultancy, we would literally have a whiteboard where we'd have like Monday to Friday, and we'd have like the four names of the four of us, and we'd say, what are we each working on in the AM and what are we each working on in the PM? Because like, there'd be multiple projects, and you'd have to make progress in multiple directions at the same time. And that very directly translated into how we ran Intercom in the early days. But also, it produced this respect for time and respect for momentum that actually did become a part of the culture of Intercom. And we would say things like shipping is our heartbeat or every day counts or whatever. And a lot of that, I think, traces back to the idea that we literally used to sell time. And especially when we were in the world of trying to run a consultancy so that we could work on the side project, you really needed to defend your time to maximize the time on the side project. Otherwise, there will be no Intercom, right? So, like, I think that was one thing. And then the other thing, I just think it's fluffy, but like, it was kind of like, it was like we made all our obvious mistakes in how to run a company early on. Tried all the shit, like everything from like whatever you want to say, holocracy, 4-day work weeks, all that sort of, all that crap just got flushed out early on. And we kind of settled on like, all right, look, the best way to do business is to do business. Let's have a hierarchy. Let's have roles and responsibilities. Let's have clarity. Let's have structured ways to run things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And like that all kind of helped us start as a mature company. There are some great startups out there where I would say the founders, even though they're brilliant, they just don't really understand business yet. And as such, they're still prone to like, I was at this talk and such a person said that the worst thing the CEO should ever do is blah blah. And I'm just like, oh please stop, just do your job, like But like it's just there's a bit of like there's just a bit of maturity that you get from running any type of business that I think that we all kind of got to bulldoze our way through for like the 2 years or 2.5 years that we had the agency that kind of paid off. So I would generally encourage people like even if your first idea is a bad one or whatever, like sometimes it's good to fire off a few kind of blanks or whatever, because like you're still getting your eye in for what type of company and culture and process that you actually perform best in, etc. So I'd say they're the two things. The other thing was Contrast had a really popular blog. Of course, me and Owen used to write on it, and that kind of actually was another part. Some of those posts actually still live on the Intercom blog, which is interesting. Like some of like our most popular posts are like 18 years old because they actually had their origin from Contrast. But yeah, so I'd say there was a bit of that. But again, just working out the content works and you can actually write stuff and actually get attention. That was that idea probably came originally from Contrast.
I mean, I think running an agency, you're right. It makes you really conscious of kind of speed and the value delivery over time. It makes you very kind of focus on velocity and delivering value quickly. And so that's clearly come through. I think also like people talk about kind of like, first time founders versus second time founders. And of course, your agency wasn't a traditional startup, but it had all of the trappings of having to hire, having to build culture, and caring about the bottom line, like knowing about money and kind of making sensible business decisions. And so I think that probably put you in a really good place for then starting Intercom. One of the things I'm curious about, because your agency was on the sort of the design side of things, like when you kind of started Intercom, like I presume, I don't know the story actually, but I presume you had to go and raise money at some stage. Did the VCs you spoke to go, well, like, why would we give money to an agency? We should be giving money to an ex-Google exec or someone that's worked in the city or whatever. Like, did you get any pushback around what you were building and your background?
The chain of events was that we sold off our product Exceptional, and that got us a limited amount of proceeds, which helped us bring Intercom to a certain point of maturity. Owen moved to San Francisco and started talking to VCs. Probably the toughest round we ever raised, or he ever raised, but certainly like there was definitely a lot of like kind of a combination of who are you guys and what the hell is this thing? And the thing in that case, we didn't have like the language you could use to describe Intercom today, like not deliberately, but we invented a lot of it. Like, as in, people talk about digital adoption platforms and behavioral targeting and all that sort of stuff. That wasn't the nomenclature of the industry back then. So there's definitely a lot of like we were saying, this our original pitch for Intercom was it's a CRM plus messaging app plus messaging product for web apps. And that kind of like resonated if you had a web app, but to VCs they were like, so which is it? I'm like, are you Salesforce, or are you Marketo or Pardot or something like this? And I think that was like, it took a while for people to really get it. The VCs who got it the most, I'm thinking specifically about Mamoon from now Kleiner. What they saw was how their portfolio were using it. That was the thing that was like, oh shit, that is cool. You just found all your users in San Francisco with 3 clicks, and then you're able to message them all, and that's why they're showing up on Friday. That's incredible. That was like a breakthrough moment. Intercom, by the way, is still, in my opinion, like the best tool out there for that. But I think so. That was the chain of events. There was less probably interrogation into our individual backgrounds per se. Like we were still. I wouldn't say we were like in any way known figures, but like we weren't full of nonsense either. Like if you Googled any of us or like chased down our GitHub stuff, it all looked logical enough. Like, yep, these guys built this thing. Like, but I'd say it would have been a very different raise if we were proposing that we were going to build the thing, as opposed to we have it and we have a lot of free users and we're going to start charging next year, which was actually the pitch that we were asking people to sign up for. Our first check, but as a side note, going back to the contrast thing, came from Biz Stone, and that was because Owen met him when he was on a tour of Silicon Valley back in like '06 or something like that. We also got like a lot of, we have, at contrast, we built a web app called Quitter, which told you when somebody stopped following you on Twitter. That was pretty famous. So that got a second contact with Biz, I think. And it just kind of played on from there. So we kind of had the beginnings of a network that kind of helped as well. But like most generally, what I'm saying is we were credible people in the sense that they could definitely build software. And more importantly, we had a product that like clearly worked, you know. So I think that helped. And if there's a translatable piece of advice there, it would be like, get your product as far along as you can before you need to go and raise money, because you know, as a VC or even as an angel, I'll look at people as just this big bag of risks. Can you know, are you a good founding team? Are you real people? Are you taking this seriously? Can you build software? Do you know how you're going to go to market? Do you talk to your customers? Are you humble? Are you this, are you that? Like, and the more of those you can cross off the list, the less diluted you'll get, because the more they'll be willing to take a high value bet on you.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. Like I guess most people before getting into the VC or investing world assume that everything that a VC is focused on is the product and the idea. But actually, you start seeing the same products come again every 3 or 4 months, and often you're waiting. Say, well, we didn't invest in this last team. Let's wait because in 3 months' time the same idea will come along, but it'll be the right team. And so I think having a team that have worked together and that de-risks the kind of
founding dynamic.
risk.
Yeah.
You know, having a team that have some existing profile, it doesn't have to be huge, but you know, you had a bit of a social media following, you'd spoken at conferences, you had a connection with an audience. You know, I suspect your first 1,000 customers were probably people that you had a direct connection with, or at least your first 100 before you started going and having to do cold outbound and all that kind of stuff. And so that massively de-risked those first few months or years. And like you say, you had a product, you had users, rather than it was just a deck and a couple of people with a dream. So all of that stuff, if you can do as much of that as possible before you jump in, the better, I'd say.
Yeah, 100%.
One thing I was kind of curious about is like a lot of people talk about product market fit. Like, when did you realize that you'd actually cracked something? When did you realize that like you'd reached product market fit, things were working? And then how did that kind of change what you worked on moving forward?
Probably somewhere around the early customer calls, when just every single one of them was like an explosion of like, oh my God, where has this thing been all my life? Combined with like a few feature requests of things that we were like, yeah, we definitely need to build that a while. You know, the other part of product market fit is like, you know, it's one thing to be in a state of product market fit, but the other one is just like, is your intuition still correct? Like, are the next 5 features you're going to build roughly what the customers are asking you for, or are you deviating in some way? And there was definitely some options for deviation. Like when we started in Intercom, like mixed panel was probably just getting started, but a lot of people were trying to drag us down the analytics road, and I think ultimately that would have been a mistake for a load of reasons. But like I think that was probably the biggest chunk of feature requests that we just consistently said no to. But yeah, I think product market fit was probably obvious once we started talking to customers early on. Did it change what we built? I think the stuff that became more obvious was like, all right, given that people really want to message their customers and hear from their customers, how do we make that really good and really powerful in ways that are aligned with that? So it's almost like we were done exploring the solution space, and then it was like, let's go deep in each of these features. So then there's other stuff like that. It's more how would you say, it's more market opening. So like building an iOS SDK so you could put Intercom into your mobile app was an obvious thing to do, but you wouldn't do it before you'd actually got it working on the web, you know. And then obviously Android and all, and then making, you know, other versions of can you skin the messenger, all that sort of stuff. They're all things that we would do once we had kind of, you know, been like, yep, it's definitely a thing that people want to see and talk to their users. And that's why it was called Intercom, eyes and a mouth, see and talk to your users. The whole thing makes sense. Right, everyone's buying this, let's go, you know.
I mean, it sounds like you actually sort of ended up finding product market fit quite early. A lot of startups, you know, they have to pivot. They have to kind of wander around and try a bunch of different things, and they don't work. And sometimes it is the product, sometimes it's position, etc. But it sounds like there was a real market kind of pull, which is great.
Well, with the caveat that, as we said earlier, like we weren't trying to build an Intercom. We were trying to build an exceptional, and Intercom was the byproduct, if you know what I mean. Like, but yeah, you are right. Like, I think ultimately, look, it was like SaaS was a richer, more easy to play in space back then. There were a lot of ideas. We had like loads of other ideas that we thought were going to be really important too. We had ideas for things that ended up looking like Amplitude, ended up looking like any of the revenue analytics products you see today. Obviously, then like you know, I'm trying to think of a few others. Like we had like ideas for like product research and product discovery. but like that's because SaaS was probably realistically only like 4 years old, like the sort of heyday of Basecamp and Rails and all that sort of stuff. So like there was still the idea of building products for these people who were inspired by that wave to build their own products was pretty lucrative. Like most things hadn't been done. I think SaaS today is drudgery largely because like it's been tapped. And I think what you're seeing now is all the people who are in AI startups and solving internal AI shaped problems like, oh, we need to like version our prompts or whatever. They're now going off and starting their own prompt version or AI product or whatever because they realize I'm going to build stuff for the AI guys, which is the same thing. So it's like every kind of technological wave has this like you can sell the pickaxes or you can sell the gold or whatever, or you can chase for gold or whatever. And I think what we're seeing here is that again. But like I do think, yeah, we got product market fit early. I think a lot of the companies in that era would have because it was a very if you were willing to take the overall market risk of, I think SaaS will be really big, there were a lot of opportunities you could have chased. And I think we chased a really good one, a really valuable one, and one that kind of suited our skills as well.
I mean, again, I think as you sort of mentioned, like timing is super important. You were sort of in a bit of a greenfield time where there was lots of opportunity to build new platforms from the ground up. Back in the day, I think it's still true to some extent today. Like the vast majority of SaaS companies seem to be like an interface on a spreadsheet, and it's amazing how many companies I still see today are like that. But you were doing something quite fundamentally different, and there was really opportunity there. And it sounds like you found some really good backers in the early days, and you really leaned into that. Reaching product market fit is often the first challenge, and a lot of companies don't even get there. But it's easy to drop the ball even once you've got there. When you're going from like we found product market fit to scale, I'm just kind of wondering like what were those sort of those scaling days like? Did you have any particular rituals or processes that allowed you to scale your team from 5 to 50 to 200 and beyond? Like what advice would you give to a founder that's going through that same kind of scaling journey today?
The advice I'd give is probably slightly different to what we did. What we did was we ultimately, like the thing that allowed us scale was understand. We did like a lot of research. Specifically, we actually hired Bob Mesta and the Rewired Group, and we looked at how everyone was actually using Intercom, and we found 3 or 4 very different usage patterns. It was basically customer service, there was product onboarding, there was product research, and then there was like sales. Basically, that's the different ways in which people were actually using Intercom. And we kind of decided to like make each of those things individually purchasable. So you did, because a lot of people would say, I really wanted to use you guys for customer onboarding, but we're a Zendesk house. And I'm like, why the hell does that matter? And because like the answer is the way we were marketing ourselves at the time said that it was all in, or you had to do it or not do it. So we ended up saying, oh well, how do we like increase our market share? Well, we could spread the product, split the product into individual components, and that would work. And like that basically worked. We went from selling Intercom to selling products called like Acquire, Engage, Resolve, and Learn.
And these are sort of like jobs to be done framings to some extent.
Very much
and also,
so.
I guess it creates a bit of a routine. Like if someone's happy with their current product, but they want just a small piece of what you offer, I guess they can buy one of the 5 tools, and then you have the opportunity to slowly sell
Cross-sell, share wallet, all that sort of stuff, land and expand or whatever. And generally, like honestly, that worked. What we got, in my opinion, and in Owen's opinion, I think wrong was like trying to push all of that up market. Got really hard because it was basically 4 different products, and you get like you like to think, well, they all have shared functionality. The challenging stuff is like people using the onboarding thing are all about, they want marketing attribution analytics. People using the sales things need really deep Salesforce integrations and all sorts. So the weight of each of the products is pretty heavy when you go up market. If we had stayed perfectly in mid market, I think we could have stayed where we were. We ultimately went up market, and then like we're kind of skipping ahead here, but that was what ultimately led to us zooming in on support and led to Finn and all that other stuff. We can get into that if you want. But I think like that's that was what we did do. What I would advise founders, if you feel like you've caught on to something, I would say like trust your intuition because clearly it led you to that point. Don't lose the muscle of actually talking to customers. Don't let somebody tell you like something about like up market or at scale, like as if it's this sort of predicate that lets them rant any way they want. Because you'll get a lot of this, well, I'm sure that this works fine, but at scale, you're going to need a team of blah, blah, blah. Like, don't believe a word of it until you've actually seen it. Like, so I think, basically avoid the force-fed advice that you will get. It's almost always out of date, and sometimes just was always wrong. And like, so that's the first thing I'd say. Secondly, is just like, don't move too fast. And sometimes the fundraising can trigger this, where you're after going and raising 30 million on a valuation of 120, and now you damn sure need to grow into it, so you better get going. Like, I think that can actually trip you up a little bit as well. Like, it's really, really important. Like, if you're onto something good, the chances of you making a mistake that screws it up is actually quite high. So don't move too fast without understanding exactly what it is you're doing. And that often means not outsourcing understanding of it to your newly hired COO, to your board, to your most recent investor, but actually means you go and you understand it properly yourself, and don't like do it until you actually understand what you're doing. And if that means talking to 15 people who've done it before, make sure you're talking to the right people. Make sure you're talking to if you're talking to the guy who scaled go to market at DocuSign, cool. His version of events makes him look like a goddamn hero. Go talk to the CEO of DocuSign in that period and ask them how do they scale, because that's a different story almost always. So anyway, there's a lot to that, but like, I think in general, if you feel like you've backed a winner, be careful about screwing it up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is definitely what I wanted to lead to. And just to your point, we will definitely talk about AI. I think I'd lose my official podcast license
Yeah.
if I didn't talk about AI. So we'll get onto that in a second. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, again, on a smaller scale, like I always sort of advise founders before they start going out and hiring their CMO or their head of sales or whatever, you want to kind of do the job first, because you actually don't know, like if you've not got your playbook, you don't know how to hire someone to fill that playbook. And if you hire someone that's never built that playbook before and expecting them to kind of do the hard yards, there's a really good chance that they won't, that there'll be someone that operates from a playbook rather than builds. And so I think that's true around all these things. I think hiring a head of growth or a head of HR or COO, like your best route is by feeling the pain and doing it yourself and being able to kind of bring someone in. And I think you're absolutely right. Like everyone in a job interview will tell them how they're the hero of the story. And I think asking around and trying to get different people's opinions, I think would be super helpful. Like, was there a point where you suddenly kind of like the team was growing so quickly that you'd come back after a weekend and there'd suddenly be 30 new faces in the company that you didn't recognize? And like, if you had that kind of mega growth, like if there was a point where you went from 200 to 500 in a blink of an eye, like how did you as a founder deal with the changing culture that must have brought?
Yeah, I mean, I guess me personally, the thing that I always noticed was I was living in San Francisco for bits. Whenever I'd come back to Dublin, the office just felt like it was like I'd regularly come back to find my desk was gone. I'm like, do I not get a desk? But like, we were just growing so fast. We were like, there's like meetings in like every single possible room. You'd literally be walking in a stairwell and there'd be three people with their laptops out trying to discuss the design or whatever. Like, it was just like that type of thing was always crazy to see. And then more recently, I think post COVID and post Owen's return, we had an event just to kind of kick off the sort of the next wave of the strategy, which is about AI and all that sort of stuff. And it was the first time we had basically the whole company, well, not even the whole company, we'd half of the company, to all of the North American employees were in San Francisco, all of the Dublin team, all of the European team were in Dublin. That was the first time I was like, Jesus, this is the last time we'd been all together would have been like 2019 or 18 or something like that. So it was the first time I'd seen that many people, which was crazy as well. On culture, I would say,
How many are you now?
about 1,100 now. Yeah.
Okay, wow. It's a
Yeah.
good size.
It's like relative to revenue, all that. I feel good about the headcount. The thing I would say on culture is I think there's a few different takes, and they're going to sound inconsistent. One is like, your job isn't to preserve the culture; it's to let it evolve in a way that you believe it needs to evolve, and stop it from evolving in a way you don't want it to evolve, and changing it when it's no longer fit for purpose. And I think people get that wrong. And the ways in which this can go wrong is, a very common thing you'll hear in a startup is like, well, we've just hired Billy. Billy's our head of sales. And then some, 20-something who doesn't yet understand business will say, well, now that we've got a sales team, is this going to change the culture? And the founders are tempted to say, no, of course not. We're still the same team. And the actual answer you have to say is yes. We are deliberately changing the culture to be one that is fit for the business that we want to be. And that's an example of like, you have to reject the idea of cultural preservation. There are other times when you hire somebody who decides that your culture needs to change and you don't agree, or you don't know what they're actually saying, but they've said things like at scale and we're going to be upmarket and all sorts of shit. So you just think that means we're going to treat our customers like shit and keep them at a distance and all that. And for some reason you let that happen. I think you have to reject those changes. And then later on, it turned into more about like, look, we're competing against every high flying startup out there. Like, you know, you've seen emergence of things like 996 and all that. Like, it's a real thing. Like the stakes and the competitive battleground of startups is really, really high. And as such, you need to build a culture that's like fit for battle in a sense, right? Which means obsessing about the right things and not talking about the wrong things. And I think there's that change is the one that I think most people chicken out of. It requires a pretty brave dictate from on high, and that was what one of the things that Owen did when he returned, was sort of say we need to adapt our culture to for this new ground we're heading into. And I think it's easy to talk yourself out of that one. It's extremely easy to say, no, some small amount of change will be fine here. We'll do something figurative, something that's like a little, like a token gesture. And then we'll go back to the same things we were always doing. You need to go around deleting processes and all sorts of stuff to actually get real change.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of small startups really like to use the metaphor still to this day around a family. And it's lovely and it makes everyone feel really warm.
Yeah.
But you know, like you don't let members of your family go if they underperform, and you keep everyone around and you want to make everyone happy. And I think the sports team mentality is a much sort of better one, because you're there to do a job, you're there to deliver an outcome. And if people are underperforming, it's not because you're a mean person for letting them go. You have a conversation around performance, and if someone else comes along that can do a better job, your goal is to kind of get to the top of the league. And so I think it requires quite a bit of a leap, particularly if you're someone that comes from a small agency, kind of we're a family mode, and then you'll kind of know we're a performative unit. I think it can be challenging. A lot of the problems I see, because again I work in the early stages, is I often see like the people that want to go and work for a 20-person company are often very different from the people that want to work at a 2,000-person company. And actually, if you're someone that really enjoys leading a 20-person company, like suddenly you start scaling and you want to try and have this sort of feeling, well, I can run a 200-person company like a 20-person company. And there's a real avoidance of process, there's a real avoidance of kind of the things that you need to scale. And often that can be quite challenging, because you can become a real seagulling leader, that kind of micromanaging, because you're losing, you're wanting to keep control of everything when it was a 20-person company, but you can't possibly be in every single decision at 200 or 2,000. And so I think often some of the reasons that people struggle with scaling is because they don't actually grow the revenue or the user numbers as fast. But sometimes it's because the culture kind of hits a brick wall, because there's resistance in the founder, or there's not resistance in the founder, but there's resistance in the founding team, and that can create some really challenging conversations. So you've talked about it a little bit. You've hinted at not hinted, but you've mentioned Finn. Like, I'd love to kind of understand the evolution of how you went from a more sort of traditional human-powered tool into realizing that AI was this thing you needed to lean into heavily. How did that all come about?
Yeah, it was November 29th, 2022. Everyone remembers where they were when they loaded up ChatGPT for the first time, right? Obviously, like, the texts were flying. People, have you seen this? This thing's crazy. Oh my God, this feels like a real step change. Fergal, who's our head of AI, our chief AI officer, that wasn't his title back then, as you'd guess, he pinged me and said, hey, have a look at this thing. I met Fergal the following day, and then I had a phone call with Owen that evening, and then we spoke all through the weekend. Like, I think the things that were obvious was like AI was going to change software, because we basically had this new set of probabilistic behaviors that weren't previously possible. It wasn't obvious to us what that meant immediately, but it was obvious it was going to have some useful applications. We agreed on that we'd start building something immediately, and 4 weeks, 5 weeks later, we were actually the first like large software company to integrate, I think, LLM powered tech, and we were using GPT 3.5 to do things like inbox summaries and like translations and a few other bits and pieces. And that we launched all that pretty quickly, and it got a kind of a rave review from the industry, because it became this sort of used as the example of like, hey, maybe AI is actually going to help the incumbents more than it might help the entrants. And I think that the pendulum was swung in many directions, including this week alone. And then when we got access to GPT-4, that was the first point where I think Fergal had said, hey, because I don't remember when it launched, it was all about hallucinations. Everyone wanted to talk about hallucinations and guardrails and how you couldn't stop it from making shit up and all that sort of stuff. With GPT-4 and with better prompting and better prompting skill, we were able to pretty much get ourselves to a point where we were confident it would not hallucinate. So that was when Finn came to life. And it was very obvious once we could see that like Finn could answer most questions given any source material whatsoever, given a document that roughly explains it, and given effectively like the corpus of humanity, which is the other thing that all LLMs have. Can you infer the answer for how do you reset your password? Yes, you can. But also, can you infer the answer for like, how do I merge two projects if one of them is archived, right? In Asana or something like, right? There is an answer to that, and it might not be perfectly documented, but it is there. You can find it in the tokens. There's a sentence over here and a sentence over there and something over here and some understanding of what the word merge can mean and all that sort of stuff. You'll put it all together and you'll find the answer. It very quickly became obvious this thing is going to do all customer support in the future. We don't know how long that'll take. At the time, voice wasn't even a thing or whatever, but like it was very obvious that like this thing is going to do most support in the future, and it's going to do it quicker and faster and cheaper than a human. And the market wasn't ready for that message at the time, honestly. And the reason I say that is like everyone, including us, were probably limped in a little bit too much and sort of said, hey, this thing can help your support team. In practice, that's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is it's largely going to do a lot of the work that the support team would have previously done. And it'll do that because, again, it's just down to business. It's better, faster, and cheaper. And then there'll be new roles created and all that sort of stuff. And we can talk about job displacement if we want. But like this is what we were kind of wrestling with in 2023. We launched Finn in March 2023. When we launched it, it resolved on average only like 25% of the conversations it saw. Today, that figure is 65%. And today, Finn's doing over 1 million resolutions a week. So it's a big at scale beast of a thing with like thousands of customers. But it's very clearly like now no one debates it anymore. Now it's like within the industry, people say, yeah, no, obviously, the only question is like how many winning companies will there be here?
So you feel that eventually something like Finn will solve 100% of the problems, or do you think that it will sort of tap out at, I think you said it's 60 at the moment, would it be 70, 80,
Yeah.
90%?
I think it'll vary business by business. I don't know if it'll ever get to pure 100 because you could always make something up that requires new knowledge that doesn't actually previously exist. And unless people want Finn to actually write support strategy, that might not happen. But, like a lot of like, if you take a very basic internet business, like a D2C product that only sells one thing, it's reasonable to assume it could do 100% of that because it's just one type of question or like, there's like 10 questions that account for like 99.999 and in any given period, that might be 100. So I think that's one thing. It's different when you think about like, say, what does customer service for like Workday look like? Well, they probably get like 20,000 questions a month, but they probably fit into 963 different categories. And the chances of you having enough documentation and have gone deep on each of those 963 categories is low. And then also on top of that, layer on new product features getting shipped all the time and all that. And all of a sudden the docs will go out of date. And as a result, stuff will overflow. And then there'll always be new scenarios that people hadn't considered. But I think anything around the 90s is quite reasonable. I think 100% is achievable for certain specific industries. But I think in general, getting to 90 is going to be good enough to change the entire organization.
Does Finn have an agentic angle? Because I guess like with customer service, a big part of customer service is just finding information that's kind of hidden from the customers, often in FAQs, often in their account details or whatever. But often the reason people kind of phone a customer service line when they're really stuck is because there's some series of actions that customer service person needs to do. So if I come and I'm stuck with I'm using Intercom, I'm using Finn, can Finn actually transact? Can Finn actually look something up? Can it hit a button? Can it change a database listing? Could it go and look at 3 or 4 different products and kind of do actions?
Yeah.
Or is it purely just kind of gathering information?
So we have this feature called procedures. It's like where you basically describe how to do something, and it can include API endpoints or it can include MCP servers, custom data lookups, anything you might need. So like, so if you need to rebook a flight, if you need to check a package, if you need to change the address on something, if you need to route an order, check on the status of an order, anything that a customer service rep can do, generally Fin can do. And that's and we literally built procedures for this exact thing. So like the way we categorize sort of support is there's informational queries, which is what you're describing when you said, hey, this is a question that is answered in text or whatever. There's what we call complex queries or procedures, which is like, hey, something has to change somewhere in order for this to be resolved. And then you've got other stuff like troubleshooting, which is another type of skill that Fin has, like where like somebody might give you a scenario like the light on my modem is red. And okay, you might have a series of steps, and it's ultimately you have a kind of a workflow of triage that you want to go through. Check if this, is it plugged in? Is the wire connected? Is the wire torn? And you again, it's a type of a procedure where you sort of say, if somebody is reporting a problem and they're not being super specific, here's the diagnosis steps. And you need to do all that. But like, yeah, we build everything into Fin that we think a human does to do customer service, and including updating its own knowledge and all that. Like Fin will see what the humans say and then adapt and react to that as well. So like, it's like the whole product is like designed to be ultimately your customer support team.
Yep. I mean, when you sort of explained how Fin can sort of think through problems, it reminded me I was having a lot of problems with like frames dropping using Elgato Camlink. And I went to the Elgato website, couldn't find anything, went to all these forums of people. I ended up going to ChatGPT, and it did exactly that. It walked me through all the troubleshooting. Yep. I told it my camera, it decided the right settings, and it was much more patient. If you're a customer service rep and you're being told that you have to answer every call in 2 minutes, like ChatGPT kind of sat with me for 2 hours trying to figure this stuff out, uploading images, and so I can definitely see how in many instances it can give you sort of one-to-one kind of a real sense that you're being kind of looked after.
We still, in our industry and in the society at large, talk about AI like it's like subhuman, as in like, oh, they're after sending me over to AI. But when you imagine, I challenge you to imagine a better experience than you had with that Elgato scenario, which I've been through as well. You actually want somebody who's like no pressure, like as in, if they're breathing down the phone, have you done that yet? You get stressed or whatever, right? It's actually exactly what you want and the behavioral traits that we see is when people use Fin and it gives a good answer, they actually come back for loads of questions, which actually as a product owner is exactly what you want, because you want them to get the answers to all of you're probably in a better Elgato customer now than you were prior to that support experience. Because you've resolved your problem, and now also you probably know a little bit more about how all the tech works as well, right? And you're probably going to use fancier features, and maybe you might even buy a new camera, and all that stuff is downstream of a good support experience. So I think like there's one thing which is just like understanding that AI is often just better, full stop, no asterisk, no apology, not an alternative, just superior, superhuman, whatever way you want to say it, is interesting. The other aspect which we've been working on, and we just announced a couple of weeks ago at our event, is this idea of Fin as a customer agent, which is not just Fin doing customer service, but actually Fin as a concierge inside your product. So imagine, put on your product hat for a second and just imagine what it feels like to say, hey, and by the way, inside this product, there's going to be an AI agent who is going to guide somebody through everything and will answer every single question about how to do anything, including going and doing the things if that's what they want them to do. All of a sudden, like you think about all your kind of core product goals as a PM you might be designing around, you're like, hang on a second, this thing will actually be the solution. It will improve all of our onboarding. It will improve all of our adoption. It'll improve our social sharing, whatever it might be. And I think this is the way in which AI is going to dramatically change software, is that we're going to realize that like the UI, the skills that we have spent 2 decades acquiring might be best off summed up in a text box titled, what are you trying to do? And that has like transformative changes. We still even I myself, knowing all of this, I still trip myself up and be like, but we need the user to click the button. And like, you don't actually need the user to click the button. Like the button can click itself. That's not the thing. What you need is the user to want to do the thing or to know that the thing can be done. And once you realize that, like all of your how do you say, natural ways of thinking through UI design, they all kind of go away, because you realize what we actually are is like, in our world, we're like primarily like, what are existing workflows and processes, and how do we apply AI to them to basically make them go away entirely and deliver the best possible experience for the end user on the other side of it. And that's just, it's a different muscle versus me and you who might have grown up like opening up OmniGraffle or something like that and dragging boxes and arrows around. Like that's like the boxes and arrows are still relevant because the journey is relevant, but the wireframes aren't. You know, it's just a different world.
Yep. I mean, I think when you interact with some kind of chatbot or AI agent or whatever you want to call it, like you're breaking a complex problem down into steps. And actually, the ordering of those steps when you're using voice can be very, very different. When you're using interface, as a designer, we almost force people through a particular flow. Like most of the UIs we work follow a flow. And that flow might work for 60 or 70% of the people, but it might not work for the other 30. And I definitely think we're getting into a world in the future where interfaces will recombine based on different users' preferences for how they think through problems. And I think AI is the start of that. It's much easier to do in a chat interface, but you can definitely imagine how actual shopping interfaces, the cart could be reordered, or the browsing process could be reordered. And I think we're moving into that really interesting world. And so I think it's fascinating. I'd love to just kind of move a little bit into one of the other things you're doing at the moment. Obviously, Intercom is a big part of your life, but you're also doing a bit of angel investing. Can you tell us a bit about that and what kind of things you're investing in and what's exciting you about the investing space at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I started angel investing after like probably like whatever the first secondary we did in Intercom was, and I felt like I always have felt like I have a good eye for a product, like I can look at something and basically determine if I think these people understand the landscape. And I would say like genuinely the first 5 to 10 checks that I wrote, they were all basically successful, right? Like but again, this was the heyday of SaaS where you could actually spot a looker in the bunch pretty easily, right? I think then, like most people, I probably got too overconfident and probably overinvested in 2020, 2021. But like, I would say at the time, like the thing I'm a sucker for, and I'll tell you about the weakness of this in a second, because it sounds like a tautology. I'm a sucker for basically a real product that solves a real problem that people really care about and really pay money for.
Which most people would say, isn't that every single startup out there?
Every single startup would pretend or lie and say that they are that. Oftentimes the product doesn't exist. Oftentimes the problem it solves doesn't really exist. Oftentimes the problem exists, but no one cares, or they care, but they're not going to spend money on it because it's not in anyone's budget. So I think like whenever somebody can show me a paying happy customer who isn't their friend, that's usually an anomaly that is worth having a look at. But then separately, like it's you can kind of eyeball the product and work out like what are the is it obvious what they're trying to do here, and you can make inferences from that. The downside of all that, like what I didn't say there was like in a big, large total addressable market with no competition or any of that. I have had the experience where I invested in a good looking real product for a real solution, blah, 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 and then found out that there's just a better one, and I just didn't find it. And I'm not a VC, so I don't have the time to do a landscape map and to actually like look at all the, do due diligence and all that sort of stuff. So I've been caught by that before. So these days, I try not to like write checks off my own bat. I try to like go in alongside somebody who I know would have had the time and ultimately wrote the check at a higher value, such that they definitely would have done the homework. So that is a thing. These days, though, because I think that like the problem with a lot of these SaaS apps is they didn't get out in time. So now a lot of them have to reinvent themselves, like we did as an actual AI thing. So like I don't know actually what like how the majority of that portfolio will work out. I'm optimistic in a load of cases, but then there's some I'm like, yep, I don't know. Even though you have a brilliant product, I just think you've kind of like it's like you have the best fax machine, and unfortunately printers have been invented or whatever. It's that type of thing. So these days I'm basically looking at AI with the same criteria, but I've added a few extra criteria. Like I sort of say like the 4 kind of investment criteria for AI. Again, there has to be like real product adoptions. People have to actually be using the thing. There has to be deep AI, so it can't be a thin wrapper. Has to solve a real problem, like as in something the business really cares about. And then lastly, concern I think people aren't keeping enough of an eye on is like, is the margins or is the token burn like a problem or not? Because I think a lot of people are just going to like alakazam their way to like far better margins. And I don't know if that's always going to be the case. Like if your product works by burning the haystack to find the needle, and you're paying the same amount of cost for every piece of hay as you are for the needle, there are some cases where that just might never be profitable, in my opinion. Now it depends, and obviously you can solve it with price, but then when you bring the price up, does the whole like value go away, right? So I've backed out of a few like that where I think, gosh, you're doing a shitload of work that's expensive to do to solve a problem that's actually not that valuable. And as a result, your margins are horrendous today, but they're also horrendous if the token price comes down by 10, because like the ratio of burn to like success, if you like, well, wasted token to successful token or whatever is so off that I don't know if this equation, I don't know if the maths ever maths, as the kids would say. But anyway, yeah, that's what I'm looking at right now. But I will say I'm not doing a lot right now, just because Finn is like, I've probably done maybe only like 5 checks in the last year, just because it's entirely because I'm trying to focus and I just don't have the time to review all these things. Also, a lot of the AI startups are quite infra, which means I have to go and talk to somebody to work out what the hell's going on. And at that point, what am I doing? I have no expertise to bring to that company. I should just stick the money in Bitcoin or an S&P or whatever and walk away. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the thing about kind of token economics, I think, is really interesting. I mean, I've played a lot around kind of Gen AI design tools, and the frustration that I have is you start playing with these tools and almost immediately you run out of tokens. And so you haven't hit that aha moment. You haven't got any value out of the product. You don't know if it's any good. And immediately they're saying, now, pay us, $50 a month or whatever. Like, I was using ChatGPT for months and months and months and months and months of getting value before I was like, okay, I feel now I'm ready to actually pay. And obviously they've got a huge ton of VC money they can sit on. And they've said that even their pro accounts don't make them any money, because I presume all of their money is going into kind of customer acquisition costs. But if you're a Gen AI tool doing some kind of lovable clone, and people can't see the value because you have 2 prompts worth of tokens, and then you just run out of tokens, and you're never going to get that kind of aha moment. So I think that's a real problem that people are struggling with. And like you say, even if it comes down 10x, like 10 prompts or 20 prompts might not be enough to design a really, really complicated kind of landing page, let alone a complicated kind of workable application. And so I think it's a challenging space at the moment.
I think like people talk about pricing a lot in this, and like, how do you price AI? And we were famous for outcome-based pricing, but I think ultimately the way you're going to solve this is with pricing. But then when you apply real pricing, like ChatGPT's pro accounts are what, $200 a month or something like that, that's when you start to realize, oh shit, this money's actually real. Like, and sometimes that is enough to put manners on people and make them realize they're moving out of hobbyist territory or out of prosumer territory into, wow, this thing better really deliver value, which is a clarifying moment for a lot of founders.
Obviously, you come from a design background. You're a very successful design founder that's investing in small startups at the moment. I'm just kind of wondering, some of the audience here will be founders who are interested in design because they see some value it brings. Some of them will be VCs who also want to kind of lean into design, but some of them will be designers themselves who are curious about starting a business. I'm just kind of wondering if there's any particular advice you'd give to designers who want to become founders, or founders that want to lean more into design.
For designers who want to become founders, I think honestly obsessing about a problem a lot and thinking about it deeply, and then playing with, like, it's never been cheaper to explore the solution space than it is right now. If you really think that the way such and such a business problem or a consumer problem could be solved, can be massively improved, and you in your mind's eye have a solution, there's very little stopping you building a pretty credible, at least prototype, if not production ready version of that. And I think, like, so whenever I hear somebody saying that they want to work on something but they don't have anything to show me, it's always a very bad smell these days, because like, what it means is like you couldn't even be bothered like prompting it to get me to a clickable prototype, to give me a sense of what it is you're doing. You'd rather like jazz hands me like with like slides and a pitch deck or whatever. So like, I think the best thing I'd say to a designer who wants to become a founder is like, obsess about a problem until the solution begins to emerge. That, I think it was Einstein who said, a problem well stated is a problem half solved, or whatever. I think most of the time when people can't get the solution right, it's because they don't have the problem right. So I think like, really, really refining that is really important. And then demonstrating what you're going to build clearly and cleanly through like a prototype. Like, honestly, coding's getting easier to do too. Like Emmett, who's our VP of design, is like building real serious bits of software. Like, it's a real thing. And I'll come back to that in a second. So I think that the biggest thing I'd say is obsess about the problem and start to play with the solutions. And that's the best way you can refine everything else, like product market fit and markets and phrasing and all that. They're all problems that take care of themselves once you actually have a solution to a problem that people actually care about, and it's a real problem. On the sort of founders who might want to lean more into design, we did just publish on our ideas blog, which is ideas.fin.ai, about the changes we've been making in design. So specifically, like, I think one of the reasons it's more justifiable now to invest harder in design than it has been before, because I think you can ask your designers to own the entire front end of the product. You can ask your designers to vibe code the entire roadmap so that you can show your customers all the stuff you're going to build. It's more possible now to have your designers like not file issues with Figma screenshots versus like UI, but instead actually credibly just go and fix the thing by asking Cursor or Windsurf or whatever to do it. So I think the ROI of the AI enabled designer is substantially higher, such that it's definitely worth leaning into it. That's my main thought. The only other thing I'd say is design is changing. There's no way around that, and that sounds like some thing that would have been true in 2007 as well. But I think the UI of AI is still being evolved, and be careful not to hire a create, retrieve, update, delete old school designer who hasn't adapted their skill set, because design ain't what it used to be. Understanding prompting and understanding how to design solutions using LLMs is an entire new skill that you're going to need a lot of. And there is an interaction between how the AI works and what the UI needs to be. I'll give you a very simple example. Would be like by playing with the AI, you work out what is the minimum amount of input you need from the customer to deliver the solution. You need to keep playing with that until you get that as small as possible. And then you need to go and update the UI to solicit that input from the user. And then that becomes itself a kind of a feedback loop where how you actually explain these things really, really, really matters, so that you get the right stuff from the user so you can feed the prompt correctly. And we call that role an AI designer. But design is changing, and that's just one example. So I think just be careful you don't go and hire somebody who doesn't acknowledge that design has massively changed in the last 2 years.
I mean, this is sort of slightly self-serving, but one of the things I've always loved about our interactions, and one of the reasons I follow a lot of your stuff, is I feel that a lot of my thinking and your thinking is kind of like sort of in sync. Whenever you say something, I'm like, yes, absolutely. That's what I've been seeing as well. I really love the way you're framing it. And often it's not counterintuitive, but often the stuff that you say and some of the rest of your team can sort of put ruffle the feathers of the kind of, some of the design and product and tech community. But often what I found is like 6 months later, a year later, your assumptions have been kind of played out and have found to be true. So I think it's always worth people kind of listening to what you've got to say, because they might not feel it now, but they'll probably actually come to agree in 6 or 9 months' time. So where can people follow you if they want to find out more about what you're doing and what you're thinking at the moment?
Yeah, so I'm just Des Traynor, so it's just my name on X or on LinkedIn for that matter. And then all of our latest, I'll share everything on either of those accounts, but all of our latest thinking and ideas are at 2 different places. If you're really into AI, go to fin.ai/research. That's where our AI group published their blog. If you're more into the sort of the product implications of AI, go to ideas.fin.ai, and that's where we're publishing most. The Intercom blog is obviously still alive and well, but when we're going all in on AI, we're keeping it under the Fin moniker.
Brilliant. Well, look, Des, thank you so much for joining me. That was brilliant. I had a wonderful conversation, so cheers.
Cool. Cheers, Andy.
Brilliant. And thanks to everyone listening. Thanks for tuning into the Design VC. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, share with someone that cares about the intersection of design, startup and venture. And I've been your host, Andy Budd. Till next time, goodbye.